Well, good morning, friends, and welcome to Heroes, Scoundrels, and Kings, Characters of the Bible here at Chapel by the Sea Presbyterian Church on Fort Myers Beach. I'm Dr. Jim Berger, your host. Thank you for joining me again today. And we're going to continue with our look at some of the outstanding people that we meet in the scriptures and look a little deeper at their lives and their stories. So today we're looking at King Saul, and I call him the man who wouldn't be king, or the reluctant king. You'll see why in just a moment. So let's get into our story. We start with the prophet Samuel. Now remember, he is the prophet. He has three roles he plays. He's the prophet, he brings the word of God to the people, and he's the one who declares, "Thus saith the Lord," because he is the Lord's spokesperson to the people. And so that's his first role as the prophet. Second, he has a priestly role. He leads the people in worshiping God. He makes a circuit around the various tribes and intercedes with the people before God and leads them in worshiping God. So he is very much involved in keeping the religious life of the Hebrew people alive and vibrant during this time. There is no centralized temple and there's no centralized government. That's the other thing to remember. They're all still independent little tribal regions. His third role is to be the judge. He comes to maintain civil order. He's God's servant, and he maintains spiritual and civil order in Israel among the people. Okay, so the people start lobbying him. We want a king. Why do you want a king? Well, he's going to lead us. Well, Samuel explains, if you want a king, this is what it means. These are the duties of the king. Let me explain it to you. He says, first of all, the king is a servant of God. First and foremost, this king answers to God. Second, the king may not act above the law. The king is always subservient to God's law. Third, he leads the people and leads them to victories. If you win, he can also lead you into defeat, but the goal is he's going to lead you into victory. Fourth, he's going to take your sons for his army, and some of them are going to die. And he's going to take your money and taxes. You sure that's what you want? What do the people say? Just give us a king. So God says, very well, here's what I want you to do. So Samuel is directed to go to a guy named Saul, and he anoints him to be the king. Now, here's the crazy part. Saul goes home after meeting Samuel. He's been looking for his lost donkeys. And when he goes home, his uncle asks him, "Did you find the donkeys?" "Yeah, I did." But he doesn't tell him, Samuel just anointed me to be the king of Israel. So he is a son of Kish. He's a Benjaminite. He's a big guy. He's a foot taller than his peers. And he has been anointed as king in a private ceremony. Then Samuel calls all the tribes together. Excuse me. Calls all the tribes together and says, "Okay, I've got a king for you." And he says, "All right, we'll go to the tribe of Benjamin." And then he said, "We're going to go to this family, and we're going to go to the family of Kish. And his son Saul is the one." They go, "Where's Saul?" God says to Samuel, "He's hiding behind the baggage over there." And that's why I say this is the reluctant king. They go over and they bring him out, and so he is now their king. And what transpires is there is one of the cities is attacked, Jabesh, and they are told by a rival from another country. And they are told, you have to surrender. And if you have to surrender, and if you do, we're going to put out the right eye of every man in the village, and you're going to be our servants. So they say, "Well, tell you what, give us 7 days to see if we can get some help." So they send messengers, and Saul brings the army, he unites the tribes, defeats the enemy, and then begins his unified reign. So he reigns for about 20 years, from 1030 to about 1010 BC. and he fortifies the city of Gibeah, which is just north of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is not the center of anything at this point. It's just a little backward place. Gibeah is where the action is for Saul and his people. And their chief enemy is the Philistines. And the thing about the Philistines is they know how to smelt iron. This is the early Iron Age. They control the economy. They control all the military goings on around the area. And they are the people of the coastland. If you look here, there's Ashdod, Ashkelon, and Gaza. This is Philistia. Look familiar? There's Jerusalem. Philistia is known today as the Gaza Strip. Still in play, all 3,000 years later. So the Philistines are the people of the coastland, and they are the ones who are the big opponent. Saul has several sons. Jonathan is the one we hear about, and he is a very effective officer. In fact, in one of the stories, he leads his people to victory over the Philistines. He defeats them through strategic moves on his part. Remember, the Philistines have the stronger weapons, but he uses strategy and tactics as his weapon to defeat them. Now, Saul suffers some moral weakness, and twice he fails God. And the first time, Samuel, before a battle, he's waited 7 days for Samuel to arrive to offer the sacrifice, which Samuel has told him he's going to do. But he gets impatient. So instead of waiting for Samuel, he offers the sacrifice himself. And no, I've got that in the wrong place. Samuel's not pleased with him. He says, God is upset with you. And the second one is after he defeats the Amalekites, he's told that before the battle, God says, you are to destroy all the people and all the animals. And so he keeps the best animals for himself and doesn't slay the Amalekite king. So Samuel comes in and says, what's this I hear? I hear animals lowing. I hear sheep. What's going on? And he says, oh, I saved the best so I could offer them as a sacrifice to God. And Samuel says, has the Lord as great delight in sacrifice as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Surely to obey is better than sacrifice. Now, when Samuel turns to walk away, Saul grabs at his robe to hold him back, and his robe tears. And Samuel says, this is to show you that God has torn the kingdom from you and given it to another. Now, Saul's getting depressed. So he's a depressed personality anyway, we discover as we read the story. So King Saul is now feeling like he's out there all on his own. Meanwhile, God sends Samuel to anoint a new king, and this will be King David. So he goes to Bethlehem and to the family of Jesse, and Jesse marches out all of his sons, and to everybody's surprise, he chooses the youngest son, David, and he is anointed to be the king. And the Lord says to him, the Lord does not see as mortals see. They look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Okay, so at this point, David is still a teenager. He's an adolescent. His time is coming. So in the interim, he is sent to the king because Saul, this tormented personality, suffers from extreme depression. So David is invited to play the harp for him, play the lyre to soothe him, and does it very effectively. Music soothes his spirit. So Saul develops this affinity with David, but David is still just a stripling, just a little more than a boy. And the Philistines make war on the Israelites, and they bring out their champion Goliath to battle the Israelites. And what he does, Goliath of Gath is 9 feet tall, we're told. He challenges the Israelites to a battle of champions. Why should everybody die? You send out your champion to fight me. If I win, you become our slaves. If he wins, we'll become your slaves. Well, not surprising, there's no takers. And this goes on day after day after day. And Jesse sends David down to the army camp to take some supplies to his brothers who were in the army. When David arrives, this stripling, this kid, he says, I'll fight him. Now, David has been a shepherd. He tells him, I've killed bears, I've killed lions, trying to attack my sheep. I'll take care of this Philistine for you. And Saul offers him his armor, but David can't wear it. It's too heavy. So he takes just his sling and he stops at the brook at the bottom of the valley. I forget the name of the valley offhand. And he picks up 5 smooth stones, 5 round stones. And researchers have found that there's a particular rock in that riverbed that is extremely hard. And in the centuries of tossing in the being tumbled in the river, they form these nice round balls. They're perfect for sling stones. And these slingers, when they wind up and release, that thing's traveling about 500 miles an hour when that stone is released. This is a lethal weapon he's got. And so Goliath taunts him. Now, some medical researchers have analyzed the story of what transpires. And they think that he was afflicted by some kind of a disease because his vision is poor. He can't see clearly David. He's having a hard time seeing him. And various other symptoms are described. And from that, scholars think he had some kind of a genetic disorder, but it was one where he grew enormously and powerfully. So David confronts him and slings 1 stone and hits him in the temple and floors him. Now, it doesn't kill him, but it's pretty close. David runs up, seizes his sword, kills him, and this is the part we don't find out in Sunday school, slices off Goliath's head and carries it around with him for the rest of the day. And then the Israelite army rallies, the Philistine army flees, the Israelites pursue, and there's a great slaughter. And at the end of the day, David is escorted into Saul's tent, and he's still carrying the bloodied head by the hair. The Bible is rated R, friends, because it doesn't hide all the nasty stuff that goes on. It's there, if we'll look. We don't tell that part of the story in Sunday school. At this point, David enters the king's army. And that idea of David and Goliath is still very much with us. In our popular culture, in our thinking, we still see the images that make us think of David taking on Goliath. Now, David is a very successful soldier. And Saul's getting jealous because the people are singing, Saul has slain his thousands, David has slain his 10,000s. And Saul becomes very jealous. And he tries to kill David. Not once, several times. Once when David's playing the lyre, he flings a spear at him and misses, and David flees. Eventually, David's going to have to live as an outlaw for several years. And he, excuse me, builds his band of men around him, and they basically become a warrior tribe and are constantly throughout the country making their way around. They are protecting people, so they're basically selling insurance to various small towns and tribes and such. At one point, Saul's pursuing him with the army, so David and his men flee down to the Philistines, and they sojourn there for almost 2 years. What happens is, while he's there, David learns the secret to smelting iron. And that's going to totally change the balance of power, because Israel is much bigger than Philistia. So after a while he is there, the Philistines battle the Israelites at Mount Gilboa. And prior to the battle, Samuel has died at this point. Samuel has died. That's the other thing. Prior to the battle, Saul consults a witch. Find me a witch was his famous statement. And she tells him that he will die in battle and his sons will die in the battle. And the next day, that's what happens. Jonathan and his brothers die in the battle. And when Saul sees that it is lost, rather than letting the Philistines capture him, he falls on his sword and commits suicide. And so that's it. That's Saul. His failing was he doesn't recognize that obedience was essential in the sacred trust afforded him by God. And he just took it for granted. And he's at the one time a unifying character and at the same time a tragic fallen character, almost Shakespearean in the scale and scope of it. And so Saul, on the one hand, does marvelous things for the people, but on the other hand, his moral failures and his spiritual failures ultimately lead to his demise. Now, we're going to continue with the story next week when we talk about David. And David's story overlaps, as you can see, with Saul's story. So they're all part of one whole that washes back and forth. So when we pick up next week with David, we're going to start with Saul and David. And we're going into more detail about the cat and mouse game between them. And you'll see just how intimately their lives end up being involved. So when you think about it, what's your impression of King Saul? How would you describe him?
Out of the loop.
Sorry?
He's out of the loop.
Out of the hoop, yeah. He's got plenty of problems. He's as you read the story, he's a very tormented, very depressive personality. But what were his positive qualities? What did he do well? For one, he was able to lead the people. He was able to get people to follow him, which was a big deal because all these different tribes all have their own little tribal leaders, and everybody thinks that they can do whatever they wish, but he's able to pull everybody together. And so he does have that ability, and he did it well. And I often wonder, why did God choose Saul to lead Israel? If God knew that this guy was going to have this many problems, why would he choose him? As I think about it, probably because of his ability to unify the people, his ability to consult with Samuel and work with him, despite the fact that he starts thinking that he doesn't need Samuel, he can take care of it all himself. But nonetheless, he does unify the people and does create a central government for the first time since Moses. There is now one single leader for the Israelite people. Now there is a king. And next week, we'll see how that's going to continue to play out. So next week, we'll look at King David, and we're going to look at him warts and all. Although he's seen as the greatest leader of Israel, he's not perfect. He's no saint. We're going to find out just what the man is like. And again, Saul and David, their stories are going to overlap. They're going to play together. And we'll see just how extensively next week. So this is Heroes, Scoundrels, and Kings, the characters of the Bible. I'm Dr. Jim Berger, the interim pastor here at Chapel by the Sea. Thank you for joining us today. And listen, if you're watching on Facebook, like us, share us, leave a comment down below, and let us know what you think, because we want to hear from you, just like you enjoy hearing from us. All right. Thank you. Have a blessed day, and I'll see you next time.